Hey, welcome to another episode of the Top 1% Recruiters. We have an exciting agenda here for you today. We're talking about the 6 different roles within recruiting. This is a specific role within the talent acquisition industry, and there are 6 very distinct roles that we're going to dissect, and we're going to share some insight and some knowledge and some information for you. Everybody has a role to play, whether you're a director, a quarterback, a receiver, a producer, a content writer, whatever it may be. Your role matters within your team, and it's no different within the recruiting team. You just have to understand what is your role and where do you want to go? Where do you want to stay at for the next couple of years? What is your ambition? What are your goals? These are the types of things that you need to understand about the different roles that are there within talent acquisition. So this will give you some great insight, and I'm going to be able to share firsthand knowledge because I have the professional experience of working in all of these 6 different roles. And we're going to look at the pros and the cons, and we're going to look at the compensation opportunities, right? How much money can you earn? And maybe you're thinking about making a change. Maybe you're trying to pivot. Maybe you want more of a challenging role. You're looking for leadership opportunity, or maybe you're getting burned out and you just want to scale back and lean back a little bit on that. If that's the case, this is the episode for you, and I'm excited to get into it. Okay, so what is that first role that we're going to talk about? It is the full life cycle recruiter. We're going to talk about really the traditional sense of what a recruiter is. Now, I want to preface this by saying that technically recruiting function, the full life cycle recruiting function can be broken into 2 areas. You can have a front end recruiter and a back-end recruiter. And there are organizations that do that. Staffing agencies, for example, have recruiters that primarily focus on sourcing, screening, and submitting. Then they pass it off to the account manager who takes care of the back end. And that's when they submit to the interview, to the client, schedule the interviews, make the offers, or they kind of mix and match it. The same thing in corporate America. You can have some organizations that have front-end recruiters, and sometimes they're technically called sourcers. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the next segment. But the position can be broken down into 2. And the reason why it can be broken down into 2 is when you look at the full life cycle recruiting role, the core functions that you have as a recruiter, there are close to 50 actionable items that you have to make as a recruiter within the full life cycle recruiting process. And that means everything from gathering the rec intake information from your hiring manager to screening your candidates, to sourcing your candidates, to submitting, to scheduling the interviews, to negotiating, to making offers, to closing the deals, to onboarding. It goes on and on and on. There are 50 different levers that you're going to have to push as a recruiter. So the first con about this is that if you're somebody who can be overwhelmed by too many steps in the process, then this is something that you might want to consider. Am I in the right role? Because of that, because there's a lot of logistics. The workflow is very important. And a lot of times you may be managing just one candidate. That's just for one candidate, managing somebody through the life cycle process. What if you have 5 or 10 or 15 candidates that you're working? So you're juggling a lot of balls from that standpoint. But the pro behind this is that there's really a lot of security and stability in this role because so much is dependent on you. There's a lot of investment that goes into a full life cycle recruiter because you are representing the organization. You are the broker between the candidate who's potentially a future employee and you're representing the hiring manager who ultimately is representation of the company, the bottom line, the revenue that you're trying to bring in. And so that's kind of what makes recruiting a sort of a rewarding profession, if you ask me, is that the ability that you have, again, to represent both parties and try to broker the best deal. And so your support system when it comes to the life cycle process is going to be very important, meaning what kind of infrastructure, how mature is the business model within the talent acquisition team that you have? Do you have systems and processes and policies in place? Do you have all the tools that you need to be effective in your job? up? Are you working for a company that's credible? You could be working for a highly prestigious company out there and applicants are flowing in, and that's going to be great. Or you can be working for, a startup company that nobody's ever heard of, and you're really going to have to know your recruiting pitch to bring in the talent that you want to bring into. So compensation wise, typically when you start off as a junior recruiter, that means a company that's going to come in and invest in you. If you're going to be making somewhere between $50,000 to $60,000, $65,000 per year to kind of come in as a junior recruiter, that means you could have less than 1 or 2 years of experience, or you can have no experience. You have a college degree and they're willing to take a chance on you and train you. That leads the other con there is it could be a pro too. Whenever you get into a recruiting role in the beginning stages as a junior recruiter, you must have the training and development around you. Otherwise, it's going to be trial and error. You're going to be drinking by the fire hose, which is what we do a lot of times as recruiters. But your career success really is kind of dictated by what kind of training that you're going to get, what kind of support are you going to get from there. When you're looking at like mid-level recruiters and you're talking somewhere in the $65,000 to potentially $80,000, $85,000 per year, that is a mid-level recruiter. That's somewhere between 2 to 5, maybe potentially 6 years of experience. That means you've put your time in, you got this full life cycle process, you've literally hired hundreds of people, been responsible for it. You've now got kind of that seasoned recruiter type of status. If you go over to the senior level recruiting status, then you're talking about 85, 100K, low 100Ks. It's kind of going to put you in that senior level recruiting status, a little bit more responsibility. You can really flow through the recruiting lifecycle process. You know how to develop the relationships with the managers, and now you're starting to add more value to the team. And so this is where account management or customer success comes in, developing those relationships with the manager, raising your business IQ level, understanding the programs or the products and services, understanding your company as a whole, starting to get visibility there. That eventually is going to lead you to a principal recruiter status. Within a principal recruiter now you're probably making low 100s still, probably 110, 115K, but now you can kind of stretch it out to 125, 140, 150Ks is probably where that caps off. Yeah, you have some principal recruiters that can make 165, 175K, so you can even level up as far as a senior principal level recruiter. But you have a good idea here that really ultimately the full life cycle process is essentially the same. The only difference is as you continue to start off from a junior recruiter all the way to a senior principal recruiter, ultimately you're just flowing. You're more in the zone. And so that's what really makes the job very rewarding. And again, depending on the company, the organization that you work with, if you have a maturity infrastructure behind you, then you can get through these processes to the workflow. There are recruiters that honestly crank out 100, 150, 200 hires per year. And then there's full life cycle recruiters that they're only responsible for getting 5 hires a year, 10 hires a year. So it really depends on the complexities of the talent that you're trying to recruit into your company, what the expectations are. But ultimately, it's a great landing spot. It gives you the visibility, the experience, and the knowledge that you need if you want to grow into or expand into other areas and within talent acquisition, within recruiting. So the second role that we're going to talk about is going to be about sourcers, and we can even say / researchers, but typically we know this as talent sourcers. Sourcers are the front end of the recruiting lifecycle process. So we kind of touched on this in the first role. But the sourcer is really somebody who decides to become a sourcer within talent acquisition. What they're pretty much saying is, I do not want to be a full lifecycle recruiter. I do not want to get into the administrative hassles in the hell of working with ATSs and dealing with the whole and the intensity sometimes. And again, depending on how complex your organization is, there are some ATSs that you almost have to be a brain surgeon just to get a hire through the process, because there's a lot of compliance issues and regulations and things of that nature. But then there's also some ATSs where it's pretty quick, right? I mean, we're at the point now within this time period period where a lot of things are automated within the systems. But ultimately, a sourcer does not want to be bogged down, and frankly, just doesn't want the headaches of dealing with all the nuances of the back end of the process. Where they really thrive is hunting. Where they really thrive and they really kind of get gratification is the challenge. Okay, let me start doing some research. Let me start doing some sourcing. Within, as a sourcer, you hear a lot about Boolean searches. Now with all the tools that are out there, you can expand beyond Boolean search strings. Now there's a lot of filters that are being applied into a lot of the tools. There are a lot of artificial intelligence components now within a lot of these tools. But as a sourcer, you got your private investigator hat. You're doing a lot of investigation, a lot of research. You're doing classic headhunting. You're looking at competitors. You're trying to find talent working for your competition. You may not have contact information, so you're trying to drum up contact information, but you're reaching out to candidates, not just a few times. You may reach out to candidates 10 different times just to try to get their attention and get a response rate. So you have to be methodical and organized in your outbound, in your outreach efforts to candidates, and you have to scale those opportunities. Typically, sourcers are going to be there in a role because they might support one recruiter, or they might support multiple recruiters or an entire team. So a lot of times it's almost like a utility player on a team. So if you're part of a recruiting team, you might have 5 or 6 full life cycle recruiters, and you have maybe a couple of sourcers. This is a scenario here. And so what happens is, everybody's working, everybody's doing their job, but you know what? There's a high demand, strong visibility on this one project. And so you need to find specific talent. And they say, hey, sourcer, can you come help the recruiter out to find somebody for this position? And so that sourcer goes, does their thing, and they're kind of like a sharpshooter. They're the snipers. They're the ones that are sourcing, screening, and submitting. So they're trying to do volume. They're doing the things that full life cycle recruiters just don't have enough time to do. And that's why sourcers can essentially create an amazing opportunity. And that's probably the biggest pro that you have here, is that when you become a seasoned sourcer, that's what you're known for and that's what you're recognized for, because you come in and you can find talent pretty quickly, pretty efficiently. If you can't, then you can actually articulate and brief the team on the challenges on why you're not finding that talent. So you're putting a lot more phone call conversations, you're a lot more communication with the marketplace, with the candidates that are out in the marketplace. And by doing so, you have a good pulse on what is going on with that opportunity, those positions. The cons behind this is that, you're a sourcer. And so not a lot of companies invest in sourcers. I've been part of organizations where there's 100, 200 recruiters, and they maybe have a handful of sourcers, or maybe 10 sourcers. So it kind of varies on the level of investment, because at the end of the day, most companies need full life cycle recruiters. But if you can carve a niche out and become a sourcer, then you can kind of just rid yourself of that back end of the life cycle process. And a lot of sourcers they gravitate towards becoming contractors. So this is the independent contractor route that they have. And so they like that freedom and flexibility of saying, you know what, I have to fill positions, I have to get assists in the hires that I have out there, but it doesn't all fall on my shoulders. I'm here to really provide a support to the talent acquisition team, to my recruiters that I support, or maybe I'm funneling and developing pipelines. Now, this is just kind of a general outline as far as sourcers. Now, I've been a sourcer for many years, and so I've been able to advance really what a sourcer is. There are things like effective talent pipelining, being able to strategically identify the right types of pipeline, of skill sets, of competencies that your company hires for, and then being able to methodically reach out to those candidates, market to those candidates, brand and develop and nurture and build those relationships with that talent community. That's a whole different level that we're talking about. But ultimately, that's how broad and how expansive becoming a sourcer is. There are, from from a compensation standpoint, I would say at a bare minimum, if you're a sourcer as a full-time employee, you're probably going to be making somewhere in that 75 to 100K, 125K range. Typically, sourcers are going to be seasoned, so you don't go into sourcing without becoming a full life cycle recruiter, but you can get your start in sourcing, and that can be your only role that you could have for many, many years. Again, but if you're on a contract basis, then you can probably look at 35 on the low end, $40 an hour, 50, 60, 75. There are sourcers out there making $100 an hour, absolutely, especially if you create a niche, if you carved yourself into a specialty space and you market yourself that way, you have a tremendous opportunity there. There are leads, there are teams within organizations that actually have teams of sourcers, and so you have to have a sourcing lead. And so now you're really strategizing on all the different sourcing techniques and the tools, and really even the data and analytics. So there's a lot that goes into sourcing when you look at that. It's kind of a watered down version of full life cycle, but it's an entity in itself. And so if this is an area that you prosper in, that you're currently in right now, you know the benefits behind it, but I also know that you can stretch that rollout even more. And I think right now, a lot of companies are starting to realize that sourcers are actually, there's a split from sourcers now, and there's researchers. There's companies now that are hiring researchers, because researchers now are becoming even critical for a lot of organizations, especially with a lot of the data and the content that's out there and the research analysis that has to be done especially with competition and even developing content. You almost need a researcher to kind of work hand in hand with a sourcer. So that's something that's starting to expand right now in corporate America. A lot of companies that are starting to see that. And so there are a lot of recruiters out there that are now have sort of, have integrated themselves from a sourcer role to a researcher, but naturally they're kind of doing the same in both of those sort of roles effectively anyways. So that's kind of your overview on a sourcer. I love the sourcing role. I've done it for many, many years. I was a lead sourcer, strategic sourcer, planning and executing on sourcing methodologies and building talent communities and talent pools. It's really exciting. And again, it's more of a methodical approach. It can kind of be even philosophical, but it kind of gives you a good awareness of what's going on in the marketplace. And that is really, truly an exciting part of this role. Okay, so role number 3 within recruiting. The third role that we're going to dive into is really the leadership role within recruiting. And there's a few different roles that you can play and be a part of as a leader within talent acquisition. And so it can be a recruiting manager, it can be a director, it can be a vice president, an executive recruiter, if you will, senior vice president. And outside of that corporate structure, you can actually be a business owner, right? And we talked a little bit about that in the Career Tracks episode. You can be a business owner or an entrepreneur. But we're going to bundle this up under leadership recruiting, because there's a few different tracks that you can take when it comes to the role that you play as a recruiter. So ultimately, you earn your way to these levels. You don't just jump into becoming a recruiting manager, a talent acquisition director, or a business owner. You have to have experience. And so that means you have to have a solid grounding foundation and experience when it comes to recruiting. So full life cycle recruiting, sourcing, that was probably your prior experience before you decided to say, you know what, just like the sourcer doesn't want anything to do with full life cycle recruiting. A lot of times, managers, men and women that are in that lead role, that leadership role within talent acquisition, they get kind of tired and burned out from recruiting. And so the next natural step is to jump in and transition into becoming a recruiting manager, maybe a recruiting lead. So if I'm a lead, if I'm a team, if I have a team of 5, 10 recruiters, now I can kind of lead and manage that team. So there is a people management aspect to it that absolutely plays a big part of it. But what that also means is that the responsibility for you having those deliverables, making those hires, starts diminishing. Maybe you don't have to make as many hires, or maybe you're only responsible for working on the strategic hires. And so as a team lead, as a recruiting lead, that is going to be your role. As a recruiting manager, you're going to maybe inherit a little bit more recruiters that you're going to have to manage, which means having one-on-one weekly meetings, having team meetings, looking at the data, the hiring numbers, the reports, reporting to your director or your vice president or your HR personnel. So now you're going to have to be responsible for that whole team. So this is classic leadership. That's why we call these leadership roles within recruiting. And TA manager, you can be part of a small organization, a small business, or a large enterprise as a talent acquisition manager. I've seen talent acquisition managers that manage up to 20, 30, 40 recruiters. And that can vary too from that front. So you can also have directors / vice presidents. And again, all it does is you look at the org chart and you look at the hierarchy, and just kind of any traditional hierarchy form, you have recruiters, and then somebody manages that team. And then above that, you have another direct report. And so that particular, as a director or as a vice president, now you're managing multiple managers, right? So now you have sort of business unit number 1, business unit number 2, business unit number 3, they all report to you. You don't have the ability as a director or as a vice president to get into the weeds of the day-to-day operations. So that's a very big distinct difference between the two. Somebody that's at a management level is going to be in the weeds, in the trenches, and going to be there on an operation standpoint. Somebody who's at that director level now has got a more higher level view, right? So your kind of your point of view and your point of perspective now is a totality of it, which means that you have fiscal responsibility, budget responsibility, expenses. Those things fall on your shoulders. At the same time, accountability to your customers, to the stakeholders, the people that your customers, internal customers, external customers, people that you report to now. Now they have demands. You have to be able to provide executive briefings. And so again, if you're looking for leadership roles and you want all eyes on you and you thrive in leadership roles and you want to lead people because you're a people person or because you like the innovation and you like the customer relationships and you love data and you love briefings and you love communicating and you love being personable with people, then I'd say go after it. Go and become a leader within recruiting. So outside of corporate America and these leadership roles, you have business owners and entrepreneurs. And again, there's a distinct difference between the two. An entrepreneur within recruiting is going to go chase deals. They might go after a few different deals within talent acquisition, obtain a few different clients and service those clients. Maybe they start building their own boutique firm. And so that would be something that we talked about that in the last episode as far as a career track. But business owners, again, are going to be CEOs. They're going to be executives within their organization. So they have to not only know all the stuff that goes on within the trenches, but from an operations standpoint, and then obviously clearly from a budget, profit, and loss perspective as well. They are taking the risk to hire people so that they can grow their business, develop a long-term brand, and make more money than you would working for a corporation as a senior vice president or as a director or as a manager or as a lead. Now, again, so there's a lot of pros and cons here when we look at it, but the biggest pros are really the opportunity to lead. Leadership in its sense, I think, is always a pro. I think we're all aspire to wanting to become a leader. The biggest con behind that is that there's really not much training that's provided from a lot of organizations. Talent acquisition as a whole is very limited as far as the investment in people, in recruiting, and the training and the development in that. And so you're going to have to kind of stretch yourself and get all the leadership traits that you're going to need to be highly effective. And then some of it you're just going to have to learn on the job. And that's going to determine whether you're a good leader or not. And your recruiters will tell you whether or not not. You'd be surprised how many recruiters can tell you, what they think of managers. And so there are some managers that lead by example in this specific area. If you're a recruiter and your manager is not recruiting anymore, that's okay, because they have a lot more responsibility. They're taking fire and they're usually backing you up. And I think that is the essence of a great leader within a talent acquisition space, is a manager who has your back. There's nothing that says more than a manager that goes up to bat for you as a recruiter. So when the heat comes on, they're there kind of standing in front of their team. Bring the heat on me. That's where the accountability comes from in this type of role. Now, from a compensation standpoint, it's going to vary. You're looking at six figures all the way, low six figures. Obviously, if you're a lead or a manager role, you can make the 125, 140K, 150K range. Once you get into the director or senior director or even a vice president level, you can go from 150 all the way to $250,000 per year. That's how you kind of get to that $250,000 mark. Again, depending on the organization that you look for, there is a difference that being part of an organization that only hires 100 or 200 people. You can be a director working for a $150 million company and still be making $200K. Or you can be a director leading a TA organization for a multi-billion-dollar company that hires thousands of people making $250K. So that also varies too, is like, how big is the organization? How large is the team? How big is the initiative? How many hires are taking place? The larger the enterprise, the more complex it becomes. When it becomes more complex, that means now you have to be an ambassador. Again, the business IQ has to level up at this place. Now there's all kinds of internal business politics that are now taking place, not only with your peers in leadership roles, but within the stakeholders as well. And so, again, if this is something that you're gravitating towards and you thrive on maybe being a part of an organization that nurtures leaders and develops leaders, and you just naturally feel like a leader, I would actually encourage you to do this. This is like my natural sweet spot. I love to run meetings, to give executive briefings, to demonstrate to C-level executives just exactly what a professional does at this caliber. And so there's not that many of us that are out there that really understand this part of the business. And again, there's not much training that's out there as well when it comes to executive leadership, management leadership within talent acquisition. But it is really a rewarding opportunity. There's also incentives and bonuses tied on to that salary. Typically, you can still be a contractor or a consultant. Usually when you're in this kind of leadership role, if you're not working as a full-time employee with benefits, you can be a high-priced consultant. And I've done that as well, where you're earning $65 an hour, $85 an hour. You go out to Silicon Valley and you can be making $125, $150 an hour as a leader in talent acquisition. And so those opportunities are there for you, but ultimately trying to decide, are you a more behind the scenes type of recruiter, or do you want to take on all the fire? You want to take on all that level of responsibility and represent and be an ambassador to an organization and come up with really cool ways and innovative ideas to make your company that much better? Then that's classic leadership at its best. Okay, so the next up is going to be the fourth role, and we're going to be talking about the sales/business development role. This is the function within talent acquisition. Primarily, it's going to be based in the staffing firm, staffing agency side of the house. Now, there are companies that still play a part of that. We are seeing that there are companies now that have finally got the bright idea that recruiting organizations, recruiting teams operate as a sales function. So they're being incentivized from a sales performance, because again, ultimately what happens is sales brings in revenue, but recruiting is what makes the hires. Ultimately, without the hires, you can't really have that revenue. So there's there's kind of a partnership when it comes to sales and recruiting. And so there's a lot of recruiters that get into sales, or you don't even have to be a recruiter. You can still be in sales or business development, bringing in potential clients into your business. Once you get that business in, you pass it off to the recruiting team, and the recruiting team fills the positions. That is ultimately a role that is really probably one of the most competitive roles out there, but is also the most rewarding in the sense of compensation, because there is no cap. As a sourcer or full life cycle recruiter, you're kind of limited as far as your potential income. As a leader within talent acquisition, whether you're a lead manager, director, vice president, or an entrepreneur, business owner, you have much more flexibility to earn higher income. But ultimately, when we're talking about the sales function, the sales organization, it is a grind. And that's probably the sort of the first con there, is that it is a grind. It's cold calling, it's developing those relationships. It is classic sales roles that you're playing. The pro, obviously, is that you have a lot of independence, a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. You don't have to get into the trenches of the recruiting part of the life cycle process. But on the flip side of that is you are dependent on your recruiting team. And so if you don't have that support, just like in anything sales, you can be the best salesman out there. And if you're selling a lemon, there's not much you can do. You're not going to have repeat business. And it's the same thing in staffing and talent acquisition. You can be selling companies, clients, obtaining this business where you have an opportunity to fill positions, and you bring that work order, that job requisition to your team. And if that team is not able to fill that position in the amount of time that's expected of them, you lose out on that business. And there's nothing that makes a salesperson more angry or upset than missing out on business opportunities. So it really depends on the reputation of the firm that you work for, and the lead generation is a big part of it as well. So being able to generate those leads, you're working in your CRMs, you're nurturing and you're developing those relationships. But I tell you what, there's a lot of successful men and women that are in the recruiting space, in talent acquisition, that are highly successful salespeople. Now, we can expand a little bit more into this as well. And we're going to talk about this again in a segment down the road here, when we talk about sort of the software side of the house. You can be in sales or in business development where you are selling software or products into talent acquisition organizations. So a classic case would be CRMs, chat technology, search tools, right? Anything that's going to be a tool that can be used for recruiting teams. And so that is a sales function that you have within talent acquisition. So you're not necessarily doing recruiting, but you're going to understand the landscape. As you get into this business within the sales side or business development side of the house, you can go ahead and do that. Now, there's a lot of these software organizations that do hire entry-level salespeople, junior salespeople that come in and they're just generating leads. They're prospecting. They're doing the reach outs. It's no different than a sourcer or the front end of the life cycle process of a recruiter. They're reaching out to candidates. They're sending out 10 messages, leaving messages, sending out texts, sending emails, sending marketing messages. They're doing all of those things. Within the sales organization, you're doing the same things on this front. You're trying to generate an opportunity to get a demo, to line up a meeting, to make a presentation, to let them see your services, see your product, see your tool, the latest and greatest tools that are out there. You can be able to do that as well. So you have not only the people side of the house, but you have the technology side of the house in which you can be involved with in sales. But ultimately, lower base salaries with much more upside on the incentives and the commission structure that's going to be tied into that. And I say that would be the biggest difference than getting into non-sales roles within the talent acquisition space. All right, so the fifth role within recruiting, within the talent acquisition space, we're going to piggyback off of the last one, which was sales. And what we're talking about is becoming an account manager or a customer success or a customer service representative within a talent acquisition space in which you're providing a service or a product that you're selling. And again, I'm going to go back to all the different tools and the technology that's out there, or the services that are out there right now within the talent acquisition space, whether it's an ATS, a CRM, a texting tool, an interview tool, a job board. It goes on and on and on, the amount of tools that have made it out into the marketplace. And so this is an opportunity that if you enjoy talent acquisition, if you enjoy recruiting, and you don't really want to be a full life cycle recruiter, you don't want to be in sales, and you don't want to be a leader, but you enjoy that space of selling a product or services or tools and technology, then latching on to a role like this is actually fascinating. It's great because you do get to understand what the recruiting lifecycle process is. And most people that are account managers or account reps or customer success reps, they play such a pivotal role, because I would say this is the biggest pro, is that they're really there to help recruiters. They're there to help them, to show them, to develop them, to show them and train them about their tool. And they believe that if you have a service or tool or product, that by using that tool, it can actually better your life. It can better your workday. And so that's ultimately why they're there. Now, the problem seems to be that, like anything else, your deliverable is there, but maybe it's glitchy, it's clunky, it's not user-friendly. So you have to stand behind your product, your service, or the tools that you're servicing there. If it's a great tool, then it's repeat and good customer service opportunities there on that front. If it's not, then it's going to be challenging. And I think that's the other part, is on the con side, is that you can be latched on to a product that really is just does not work in the space. And there's been so many tools that have come out, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, and you've seen a lot of new tools coming to market very quickly. I think over a year period of time, I probably did close to about 80 different demos, close to 100 demos within a year span of just looking at all these different technologies and tools and sitting through these demos. And so that's how highly evolved it's become. And so that's what can be really fascinating about it if you are an account manager or customer success. Now, as you're in this space, you not only have an opportunity here to service your customers and you're understanding the recruiting world, but at the same time, you have opportunities to upsell. And this is kind of a sort of a hitch to sales and account management. This is the account management side, is, there's always new upgrades, or there's new rollouts, or there's new modules that are being introduced into your products, into your services. And so that's an opportunity for you to upsell. And by doing that, you get kickbacks and commissions off of your upsell. So you do have an opportunity there. Or maybe you provide excellent customer service skills, and you're incentivized just by on the customer success ratings that your customers provide. So if you really are into customer satisfaction and really, and I would kind of just say obsessed with customer success, this is a great role. It really is a satisfying role for a lot of people that fall into this space. If you enjoy the technology and the tools, and you learn training and developing and building those relationships with the recruiting organization, and you're willing to understand the landscape of it, because you got to get into problem solving, solution mode, but more importantly, you got to know your product intimately. Compensation wise, it's going to vary. So again, anything from a basic account rep, you can probably earn 50, 60, 75K. And then as you kind of advance more and you kind of get involved in more of the training and development, and it can get highly technical too. Again, depending on what kind of product that you're selling on that side of the house. But ultimately, the management of the tools or the services that you're offering out there really kind of depends on your potential. But say making 6 figures absolutely is available. Making, 125, 150K. Yes, there are people that make that kind of money. Is it going to be as lucrative? Are there as many compared to the other recruiting roles within talent acquisition? No, not right now. But it depends on the maturity level of the organization, of the product that you're working for. I've seen people that have gotten into these startups where they were employees from the first 10 employees, And so it was very lucrative for them as they stuck it out and brought on new customers and things of that nature, especially in the SaaS world. There's tons of opportunities to be there if you're driven by upselling and incentivized to expand the business and the portfolio. So it can be a very rewarding and very gratifying opportunity working in that capacity as an account manager, as a customer success rep. Okay, so we finally made it to the sixth role within recruiting, and this particular role, it's definitely one of the most celebrated roles, if you ask me as a recruiter, is the function of a recruiting coordinator, the support system, the support role within the talent acquisition team. So this is going to be a very entry-level, junior-level type of role that you can play. And if you don't get an opportunity to get into recruiting as a full life cycle recruiter or as a sourcer, then typically this is where recruiters will get their start. And you can get your start coming in just like that, just as a coordinator, just as a administrative support staff, as part of the talent acquisition team, or maybe even on the human resources side. We see a lot of that. We see a lot of people that get exposed to human resources as a coordinator, and then they get some exposure into the recruiting function. Now, we say that a lot of times if you have an effective recruiting coordinator, it's a really rewarding experience because they are the glue. They are the ones that kind of keep the process, the facilitation process moving. And somebody who is an effective coordinator is highly appreciated by the recruiters on that team because there are so many of those moving parts and levers. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is some of the mundane task ends up going to the coordinators, the support staff to go ahead and pull some of those levers that recruiters typically don't want to get bogged down with. And a case in point would be a recruiter that's making $65, $75 an hour on a contract. As a contract recruiter, when they have to schedule an interview, for them to take 10, 15, 20 minutes out of their day to schedule an interview and send a confirmation email to the candidate and look at the hiring manager's schedule on the calendar and get all that coordinated and the logistics behind it, that could actually take longer. It could take 30-minute block of your time. And that is not where your time well spent should be at. And so a lot of times that's delegated to a recruiting coordinator. Processing offers to make those hires a lot of times is delegated to a recruiting coordinator. And so what we'll see is recruiting coordinators come in at $40K, $45K on the low end, and potentially even $50 to $60K. But a recruiting coordinator that is hungry and is ambitious, and they're there to grow into the role, within 2 years, they can absolutely be elevated to a junior recruiter status pretty quickly. And I've seen that happen firsthand, where a recruiting coordinator within 12 months, 18 months is making $65, $75K when they start off at $45, $50K. And a lot of it as a recruiting coordinator, the key to this is to be a sponge. If you have a recruiting coordinator that's a sponge and is willing to learn from all the seasoned recruiters around them, the other recruiters, the directors, the managers, and especially if they align with a lead or a manager or a director within the TA organization, talk about loyalty. They will groom that recruiting coordinator over a period of time because it's on-the-job training. It's on-the-job training that recruiting coordinator gets over 1 year, over 2 years, over a long period of time. And by doing so, the ramp-up time to transition into becoming a recruiter is not as heavy as it would be if you were just starting off from scratch. And so that, I think, is one of the great opportunities that you have. And especially if you're already working in an administrative capacity, office management function, and clerical, whatever it might be, and you're working in that just general administrative capacity, aligning yourself up within a recruiting team and a recruiting organization is actually much more rewarding because ultimately it's going to set you up for more success, more opportunities that are going to be available there for you. So highly recommend that. If you're thinking about it, if you're already involved, already a recruiting coordinator, and you're cheered upon, and you're part of an organization that values recruiting coordinators, continue continue getting that exposure so that you can figure out what role do I want to go into once I kind of graduate from this recruiting coordinator function. There are a lot of recruiting coordinators that just want to stay there, just like we have a lot of administrative support staff that stay there for 5, 10, 15 years. That's okay too. And so just kind of figuring out what your niche is and how to maximize your capabilities within the core TA function is going to be essential, because you can still be a leader as a recruiting coordinator because your value is so important. And it's unfortunate that a lot of companies just don't invest in recruiting coordinators. They should. Every company should have a recruiting coordinator, if you ask me. If you have a recruiting team of at least 3 or 4 people on your team, you should have a recruiting coordinator, at least a part-time recruiting coordinator, to be helping out your team. So that kind of concludes the 6 different roles as a recruiter within talent acquisition. I know that this was really an opportunity for you to really understand all the nuances and determine, like, hey, where am I at right now and where do I want to go? And I would just highly recommend, if you're kind of in that exploring mode phase, to reach out, connect to recruiters, become a part of our community. By doing so, you can ask the questions and really kind of understand what kind of role do I want to go ahead and kind of navigate to. And a lot of times, that's part of it, is just as recruiters, you don't want to get stuck into a role and then all of a sudden this becomes your life, your professional life here for 5 years, 10 years. You're sitting around for 15 years. Don't let life pass you by. I've had the privilege, and it's been an honor, to work in all of these roles in this capacity throughout my career. And I've enjoyed every one of them. Every one of them has come in the right time, in the right season. And so I'm passionate about all of these different roles. And that's why I wanted to take the time to really share this with you. And I hope it was well received. I can't wait to see you the next time. Remember, top 1%ers, we always level up.